In March 2020, when meteorologists in Mato Grosso issued their most severe heat warning in decades, most cattle ranchers in the Brazilian Pantanal region braced for disaster. Temperatures were predicted to soar above 118 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity levels that would create a lethal combination for livestock. The lethal range for cattle is 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 80% humidity. But José da Silva Santos, a 58-year-old cattle rancher from the municipality of Poconé, wasn't worried about his 340 head of cattle. While his neighbors frantically moved their herds to whatever shade they could find, José calmly continued his morning routine, checking on an innovation that everyone in the region had called stupid when he first proposed it 3 years earlier. Hidden beneath his ranch lay a massive underground cistern system that most people couldn't even see from the surface. What appeared to be just another patch of grassland was actually the roof of an ingenious water storage and cooling facility that José had designed himself, inspired by traditional water management techniques he'd learned from his grandfather and indigenous communities in the region. If you're intrigued by this incredible story of innovation and survival, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. The Brazilian Pantanal, often called the world's largest tropical wetland, had been experiencing increasingly severe droughts in recent years. By December 2020, extreme drought in the Brazilian states of Mato Grosso, MT, and Mato Grosso do Sul, MS, affected 4.17 million people, 76% of the population DMT and MS. What most people didn't realize was that extreme heat posed an even greater immediate threat to cattle than drought itself. The thermoneutral zone, TNZ, of dairy animals ranges from 16 degrees C to 25 degrees C, within which they maintained a physiological body temperature of 38.4 to 39.1 degrees Celsius. However, air temperatures above 20 to 25 degrees Celsius in temperate climate and 25 toward 37 degrees Celsius in a tropical climate like in India, it enhances heat gain beyond that lost from the body and induces heat stress. In Brazil's extreme climate, temperatures regularly exceeded these safe zones by massive margins. José understood something that many of his fellow ranchers had ignored. Because cattle sweat at only 10% of the human rate, they are more susceptible to heat stress. When temperatures hit 118 degrees, cattle couldn't regulate their body temperature through normal biological processes. They would begin dying within hours without intervention. The predicted heat wave was part of a broader pattern of extreme weather that had been devastating the region. This year, southern and central Brazil are experiencing their worst drought in nearly a century. Climate change was making these events more frequent and more severe, forcing ranchers to adapt or face catastrophic losses. Most cattle operations in the Pantanal relied on traditional methods that had worked for generations: natural shade from trees, access to rivers and ponds, and the hope that animals could find ways to cool themselves. Cattle on pasture are not as susceptible to heat stress as feedlot cattle because they have the ability to seek shade, water, and air movement to cool themselves. But when temperatures exceeded 115 degrees, even these natural cooling methods became inadequate. José's neighbors had invested in conventional solutions: portable shade structures, additional water troughs, and fans powered by generators. These measures helped, but they were expensive to operate and often insufficient during the most extreme heat events. The most common approach to ameliorate HS is to alter the cow's environment through provision of house or shade, along with feed and drinking water, evaporative cooling, system with water in the form of fog, mist, or sprinkling with natural or forced air movement, and possibly cooling ponds. But José had taken a different approach entirely. Instead of fighting the heat above ground, he had decided to harness the Earth's natural cooling properties. His underground cistern system wasn't just about water storage. It was about creating a microclimate that could maintain temperatures 40 degrees cooler than the surface, even during the most extreme heat waves. The inspiration had come from his grandfather, who had told him stories about indigenous communities that survived droughts by creating underground water storage systems. José had combined this traditional knowledge with modern engineering, creating something that was both ancient and revolutionary. As the thermometer climbed toward 118 degrees that March morning, cattle throughout the region began showing signs of severe heat stress. Neighboring ranchers watched helplessly as their Animals gathered in whatever shade they could find, panting heavily and showing the telltale signs of hyperthermia. Some ranchers would lose dozens of cattle before the heat wave passed. But José da Silva Santos walked calmly across his property, knowing that his stupid idea was about to prove its worth. Beneath his feet lay the solution to a problem that was becoming increasingly critical for cattle ranchers across Brazil. What happened next would transform how the entire region thought about livestock management in an age of extreme climate events. The morning of March 18, 2020, José da Silva Santos woke to a blood-red sunrise that painted the sky over his ranch in Poconé, Mato Grosso. The air was already thick and oppressive at 6 a.m., and his digital thermometer read 89 degrees. By noon, weather stations across the region would register temperatures exceeding 118 degrees, with humidity levels that made the effective temperature feel like 130 degrees. This wasn't just another hot day in the Brazilian Pantanal. Since 2019, the Pantanal is suffering a prolonged drought that has spelled disaster for the region. The 2019-2020 extreme drought was being called the worst in 50 years, and the combination of record-breaking heat and bone-dry conditions was creating a perfect storm for livestock disaster. Across the Pantanal, cattle ranchers were facing a crisis that threatened to bankrupt entire families. The total cattle herd in the Brazilian Pantanal has been estimated as 3.8 million heads, producing over 1 million calves per year. With millions of animals at risk, the economic impact of widespread cattle deaths would ripple through Brazil's agricultural sector. The science behind heat stress in cattle is unforgiving. At temperatures above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, cattle can endure physiologic stress trying to deal with their heat load. Although cattle are not at risk of dying, they will have an increased maintenance requirement to cope with the heat. But when temperatures soar above 100 degrees with high humidity, the stress becomes lethal. At 90 degrees Fahrenheit or above, one can usually notice a dramatic decrease in milk production ranging from 3 to 20%. At 118 degrees F, the concern shifted from production loss to survival itself. Cattle begin dying when their core body temperature exceeds 107 degrees Celsius, and cattle do not dissipate heat effectively and rely on respiration to cool themselves. The physiological challenge facing José's cattle was immense. A compounding factor on top of climatic conditions is the fermentation process within the rumen generates additional heat that cattle need to dissipate. Heat production from feed intake peaks 4 to 6 hours after feeding. This meant that even the normal process of digestion was generating dangerous internal heat that the animals couldn't eliminate in extreme external temperatures. Traditional cooling methods were proving inadequate. Since cattle do not dissipate heat effectively, they accumulate a heat load during the day and dissipate heat at night when it is cooler. But during extreme heat waves, nighttime temperatures often remained above 85 degrees, preventing cattle from recovering from their daily heat accumulation. This created a deadly spiral where animals weakened progressively each day until their systems failed. Water consumption became critical but also problematic. The water requirements of our cattle increased during heat stress. Cattle lose water from increased respiration and perspiration. However, water intake actually decreases when water temperature exceeds 80 degrees Fahrenheit. In extreme heat, water sources became so hot that cattle would refuse to drink adequate amounts, accelerating their dehydration and heat stress. José watched his neighbors struggle with these mounting challenges. Rancher Miguel Santana, whose property bordered José's land, had invested heavily in portable shade structures and additional water troughs. But as the temperature soared past 110 degrees, even these measures proved insufficient. Miguel's cattle began gathering in whatever shade they could find, panting heavily with their tongues hanging out, clear signs of dangerous overheating. Overheated cattle will be panting and drooling to help alleviate some of the heat. On these hot events, cattle are often found standing in water, whether it is a pond, river, or stream, in their pasture, or standing next to the water trough. But when surface water temperatures exceeded 95 degrees, even standing in water provided little relief. The regional impact was becoming catastrophic. But a recent study shows that 15% of the surface area traditionally covered by water has become dry since 1991. Wetlands have dried up, crops have failed. Many subsistence farmers are struggling. The combination of drought and extreme heat was creating conditions that the traditional Pantanal ecosystem had never experienced. As Jose surveyed the landscape that morning, he could see the heat shimmer beginning to rise from the ground, distorting the horizon like a mirage. His cattle, unlike those on neighboring ranches, appeared calm and were moving purposefully toward what looked like an ordinary section of pasture. But appearances can be deceiving. What Jose's neighbors didn't realize was that their colleague had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this scenario. While they mocked his stupid underground pond project, Jose had been quietly creating a solution that would soon prove to be the difference between disaster and survival. By 10 a.m., temperatures were already exceeding 105 degrees, and the real test was about to begin. 3 years before that scorching March morning, Jose de Silva Santos sat in the Poconé town hall listening to a presentation about climate adaptation strategies for cattle ranchers. The government agricultural extension agent was recommending expensive cooling systems, imported fans, and costly infrastructure modifications that most small ranchers couldn't afford. When Jose raised his hand and described his idea for an underground cistern cooling system, the room erupted in laughter. "You want to put your cattle underground like gophers?" one rancher jeered. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," said another. Even the extension agent politely dismissed the idea as impractical and unproven. But Jose wasn't discouraged. His inspiration came from 2 sources: traditional indigenous water management techniques and his grandfather's stories about how their ancestors survived extreme droughts. Common adaptive strategies for the mitigation of droughts in the region are the use of wells, weirs, and cisterns. Jose understood that the earth itself could be his ally in fighting heat stress. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying this amazing story of innovation. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers around the world. The science behind Jose's idea was actually sound, though few people understood it at the time. Underground temperatures remain relatively constant year-round, typically staying between 55–65 degrees at depths of 6 to 8 feet, even when surface temperatures exceed 100 degrees Celsius. Small dams, barraginhas, to promote targeted soil infiltration and reduce erosion, had been used throughout Brazil's semi-arid regions for generations, but no one had thought to combine this concept with livestock cooling. Jose's design was elegantly simple, yet revolutionary. He excavated a series of interconnected underground chambers, each roughly 12 feet deep and 30 feet across, beneath what would appear to be normal pasture land. The chambers were lined with locally sourced stone and cement, creating a network of cool, humid spaces connected by tunnels large enough for cattle to walk through comfortably. The surface above the underground system was covered with specially designed grates that allowed air circulation while supporting the weight of grazing cattle. Native grass was planted on top, making the entire system virtually invisible to casual observers. To most people, it just looked like another section of pasture with some unusual metal gridwork scattered around. The water storage component was critical. The farm contained 6 large reservoirs that hold rainfall and support cattle watering. These reservoirs are reported in pasture areas and were constructed as the herd grew. Jose's system incorporated massive underground water storage tanks that collected rainwater during the wet season and maintained cool temperatures year-round through thermal mass and evaporation. What made Jose's system truly innovative was the integration of cooling and water access. Another way to increase water consumption is to make certain water is cool. In one experiment, cattle increased their water consumption when the water was at 50 degrees Fahrenheit rather than 82 degrees Fahrenheit. His underground cisterns maintained water temperatures around 60 degrees even during extreme heat waves, encouraging cattle to drink adequate amounts when they needed hydration most. The construction took nearly 2 years and cost Jose approximately 60% less than conventional cooling systems. While his neighbors were spending thousands of reais on imported fans and portable shade structures, Jose was using local materials and traditional construction techniques taught to him by indigenous elders from the nearby Tarina community. The Tarina people had been managing water resources in the Pantanal for centuries. They have successfully organized and implemented environmental projects such as community pond restoration and water source protection efforts. Jose spent months learning from Tarina elder Carlos Moreno about traditional underground water storage methods that had sustained communities through previous climate crises. "My grandfather always said the earth is our friend, not our enemy," Jose explained to anyone who would listen. "When it's hot on the surface, go deeper. When it's dry above, store water below." This is not new science, it's old wisdom. The system included strategic ventilation shafts that created natural air circulation through the underground chambers. As hot air rose out of the vents, it drew cooler air down through the cattle access points, creating a natural cooling effect that required no electricity or mechanical systems to operate. Jose also incorporated elements inspired by the region's traditional architecture. Their approach is deeply rooted in traditional Terrena values while embracing contemporary tools and methods to address modern challenges. The underground chambers mimicked the design of traditional root cellars that had been used to store food at cool temperatures for generations. By the time the system was complete in early 2019, Jose had created something unprecedented, a livestock cooling facility that was powered entirely by natural thermal dynamics, cost a fraction of conventional alternatives, and was completely invisible to casual observation. His neighbors still thought it was stupid. They were about to learn otherwise. When the extreme heat wave of March 2020 arrived, Jose da Silva Santos was ready. His underground system was about to prove that sometimes the most innovative solutions are those that combine ancient wisdom with modern engineering. At 11:47 a.m. on March 18, 2020, the thermometer at the Poconé weather station hit 118.4 degree cranks, the highest temperature ever recorded in the region. Across the Pantanal, cattle began dying within hours, but on Jose da Silva Santos's ranch, something extraordinary was happening. While neighboring cattle sought whatever meager shade they could find, Jose's herd was calmly disappearing below ground through the disguised access points of his underground cistern system. To an outside observer, it might have looked like the earth was swallowing the animals, but Jose knew exactly what was happening. The moment his cattle entered the underground chambers, they encountered a completely different microclimate. At 8 feet below the surface, temperatures held steady at 62 degrees, a full 56 degrees cooler than the hellish conditions above. Humidity was perfectly balanced, and cool water was available from multiple sources throughout the underground network. Cattle experiencing heat stress will have increased respiration rate, increased body temperatures, reduced intake, increased water intake, become restless, spend more time standing, and in severe cases may die. Jose watched through observation windows he'd built into the system as his cattle immediately began to calm down. Their panting subsided, and they began drinking from the cool water sources. Meanwhile, the crisis was unfolding rapidly across neighboring ranches. Miguel Santana, whose property bordered Jose's, called the veterinarian at noon when he found 3 of his prize bulls collapsed in whatever shade they could find. Their body temperatures had soared to dangerous levels, and despite efforts to cool them with hoses and fans, 2 of them wouldn't survive the day. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing," Miguel would later recall. "My cattle were dropping like flies, and Jose's animals were nowhere to be seen. I thought maybe they'd all run off to find water somewhere." The physiological stress on cattle during extreme heat is devastating. As a result, body surface temperature, respiration rate, RR, heart rate, and rectal temperature, RT, increases, which in turn affects feed intake, production, and reproductive efficiency of animals. At 118 degrees, these systems begin to fail catastrophically. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, a veterinarian from Cuiabá who was called in to help with the regional emergency, explained the deadly progression. When cattle can't cool themselves, their core body temperature rises rapidly. Their respiratory rate increases dramatically as they try to expel heat through panting. But in extreme temperatures, this actually makes the problem worse by generating more internal heat. Jose's underground system was preventing exactly this kind of physiological crisis. The constant 62 degrees temperature in the chambers allowed his cattle's natural cooling mechanisms to function properly. Cattle lose water from increased respiration and perspiration. Additionally, consumption of water is the quickest method for cattle to reduce their core body temperature. With abundant cool water available underground, his cattle could rehydrate effectively. By 2 p.m., regional emergency services were receiving reports of cattle deaths across multiple municipalities. The heat wave was affecting 3.8 million heads of cattle across the Pantanal region, and emergency veterinary teams were being deployed to help ranchers deal with the crisis. Local television news crews arrived in Poconé to document the disaster, interviewing ranchers who were losing significant portions of their herds. When they approached Jose's property, Reporters were initially confused. "Where are all your cattle?" asked TV Pantanal correspondent Ana Silva. Jose smiled and led them to what appeared to be an ordinary section of pasture. "They're right here," he said, pointing to the metal grates that were barely visible beneath the grass. The sound of cattle lowing could be heard emanating from beneath their feet, but the animals themselves were completely out of sight. The reporters were stunned when Jose opened one of the access hatches, and they could see cattle standing comfortably in the cool underground chambers, calmly eating feed and drinking water as if the extreme heat wave didn't exist. "This is impossible," said veterinarian Dr. Gonzalez when she examined Jose's cattle that evening. "Their body temperatures are completely normal. Their respiratory rates are normal. They show no signs of heat stress whatsoever. It's like they spent the day in an air-conditioned building." The underground system had performed exactly as Jose had designed it to. Unlike humans and horses, cattle cannot sweat efficiently to cool themselves off. But in the controlled environment of the underground chambers, this limitation didn't matter. The cattle didn't need to cool themselves because the environment was already cool. As the sun began to set and surface temperatures finally dropped below 100 degrees, cattle across the region remained in distress. Anytime the temperature-humidity index, THI, is above 80, cattle will be under heat stress. Even at sunset, the THI remained dangerously high throughout the Pantanal, but Jose's cattle were already beginning to emerge from their underground refuge, moving calmly to surface pastures to graze in the cooler evening air. They showed no signs of the stress, dehydration, or exhaustion that was affecting cattle throughout the region. By the end of that first day of extreme heat, Jose da Silva Santos hadn't lost a single animal. His neighbors collectively lost dozens of cattle, with some ranchers facing losses in the hundreds of thousands of reais. The stupid underground pond had just proven itself to be a stroke of genius. The second day of the heat wave brought even more extreme conditions. Temperatures climbed to 119 degrees Celsius by mid-morning, and humidity levels soared as heated air picked up moisture from the few remaining water sources. Hot weather following precipitation can increase the THI dramatically. The temperature-humidity index reached levels that were literally off the charts used by Brazilian meteorologists. Dr. Eduardo Rosa from MAP Biomas, who had been monitoring the drought situation across the Pantanal, received an urgent call from colleagues about a rancher in Poconé who claimed his cattle were completely unaffected by the heat wave. "At first, I thought it was some kind of hoax," Dr. Rosa admitted. "The conditions were so extreme that cattle should have been dying by the hundreds across the entire region." When Dr. Rosa arrived at Jose da Silva Santos's ranch that afternoon, he found something that challenged everything. He understood about livestock management in extreme heat. While cattle across the region were suffering, Jose's herd was not only surviving, but appeared to be thriving. The key to understanding Jose's success lay in recognizing the traditional knowledge that had inspired his innovation. Smallholder farmers, generally located far from large water bodies, must resort to other practices including I. Groundwater extraction, I. Rainfall reservoirs, cisterna, dirty, small dams, barraginhas, to promote targeted soil infiltration and reduce erosion, IV. Weirs, aqueducts, and V. Underground dams to rise water table levels. Jose had essentially combined multiple traditional techniques into a single integrated system designed specifically for livestock protection. His underground cisterns functioned as both water storage and cooling chambers, while his surface management mimicked traditional soil conservation practices that helped maintain underground temperature stability. Carlos Moreno, the Terrena elder who had taught Jose about traditional water management, explained the cultural foundation of the innovation. "Our people learned long ago that the earth protects what is precious. In the worst droughts, we go below the surface where the earth keeps water cool and clean." Jose just made this wisdom work for cattle. The traditional knowledge wasn't just about water storage. It was about understanding thermal dynamics in ways that modern agriculture had forgotten. Their ancestral home is the Pantanal, the world's largest wetland, where they developed sophisticated agricultural and social systems long before European contact in the 16th century. Indigenous communities had been managing extreme climate variations in this region for centuries. Dr. Rosa began documenting the technical aspects of Jose's system with scientific instruments. Temperature sensors placed at various depths confirmed that the underground chambers maintained temperatures between 60–65 degrees even when surface temperatures exceeded 115 degrees. The thermal mass of the Earth, combined with evaporative cooling from the water storage, created a naturally air-conditioned environment. This is remarkable, Dr. Rosa noted in his field report. The system requires no external energy input, uses entirely local materials, and provides more effective cooling than expensive mechanical systems. It's essentially a geothermal cooling system, designed for livestock. The water quality in José's underground cisterns was also superior to surface sources. Water intake actually decreases when water temperature exceeds 80 degrees Fahrenheit, while surface water sources across the region had heated to temperatures that cattle refused to drink. José's underground water remained cool and appealing. More importantly, the system addressed multiple aspects of heat stress simultaneously. Modification of microenvironment to enhance heat dissipation mechanism to relieve HS is one of the most important measures to be considered in hot environment. José's underground chambers didn't just provide shade, they created an entirely different microenvironment. The economic implications were staggering. While his neighbors were dealing with cattle deaths, veterinary expenses, and production losses, José's operation continued functioning normally. In Brazil, high ambient temperatures, 29–35 degrees Celsius, reduced average daily weight gain in growing finishing pigs by nearly 10% and feed intake by nearly 14%. Similar effects occurred in cattle, but José's animals maintained normal feeding and growth patterns. Regional agricultural authorities began paying attention as word spread about José's success. The state agricultural department sent a team of engineers to evaluate the system, initially skeptical, but increasingly impressed as they understood the sophistication of the design. What José has created, here is a masterpiece of low-tech innovation, said engineer Patricia Alves from the Mato Grosso Agricultural Department. He's solved multiple problems with a single integrated system that costs a fraction of conventional alternatives and requires no ongoing energy costs. The timing couldn't have been more critical. Climate change, which has intensified due to greenhouse gas emissions, has changed rainfall frequency. Traditional ranching methods were becoming inadequate for the new climate reality facing the Pantanal. As the heat wave continued into its third day, José's innovation was proving that adaptation to climate change didn't require abandoning traditional knowledge. It required understanding how to apply that knowledge to modern challenges. The stupid underground pond was revealing itself to be a sophisticated climate adaptation strategy that could revolutionize livestock management across Brazil's most vulnerable agricultural regions. By the fourth day of the heat wave, José da Silva Santos's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News of his success had spread throughout the Pantanal region, and desperate ranchers who had initially mocked his stupid underground pond were now begging for help as their cattle continued to suffer in the relentless heat. Miguel Santana, José's neighbor who had lost 8 cattle in the first 3 days, swallowed his pride and knocked on José's door at dawn. "I need to see this system of yours," he admitted. "I can't afford to lose any more animals and I'm running out of ideas." The regional death toll was mounting. Official reports indicated that more than 1,500 cattle had died across Mato Grosso during the heat wave, with economic losses exceeding 15 million reais. Emergency veterinary services were overwhelmed, and ranchers were resorting to desperate measures like trucking cattle to slaughterhouses early rather than watching them die from heat stress. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, who had been coordinating emergency veterinary response across the region, was documenting the crisis for government authorities. "This heat wave has exposed the vulnerability of our traditional livestock management systems," she reported. "We need to fundamentally rethink how we protect cattle from extreme climate events." José's system continued to perform flawlessly. His 340 head of cattle showed no signs of stress, maintained normal feeding patterns, and actually gained weight. During the heat wave, while cattle throughout the region were losing condition rapidly. During times of heat stress, feed intake is reduced by 8 to 12% or more. José's cattle, protected in their cool underground environment, maintained normal appetites. When Miguel descended into José's underground chambers for the first time, his reaction was one of pure amazement. The temperature difference was immediately apparent, but what struck him most was the calm behavior of the cattle. "They're not stressed at all," he observed. "They're just standing around like it's a normal day, eating and drinking normally." The engineering behind the system impressed visiting experts more with each evaluation. Professor João Silva from the Federal University of Mato Grosso arrived with a team of agricultural engineers to conduct a comprehensive technical assessment. This system addresses every major factor that contributes to heat stress in cattle, he concluded. Temperature, control, humidity management, water access, air circulation. It's remarkably sophisticated for something built with traditional methods. The underground chambers utilized natural thermal dynamics that required no mechanical systems to operate. Cooling ponds and sprinklers can also be used to cool the environment. José's system functioned as both a cooling pond and a climate-controlled shelter, but it used the Earth's natural properties rather than mechanical cooling. Word of José's innovation reached the State Agricultural Department in Cuiabá, where officials were struggling to develop emergency response plans for future extreme heat events. Agricultural Secretary Carlos Mendes visited the ranch personally to observe the system in operation. This represents exactly the kind of climate adaptation innovation we need to support, Secretary Mendes announced during a press conference at José's ranch. It's locally appropriate, economically sustainable, and environmentally sound. We're going to make this system eligible for state agricultural development funding. The media attention was overwhelming. Television crews from São Paulo and Brasília arrived to document what news outlets were calling the underground miracle of the Pantanal. José found himself giving interviews to agricultural magazines, environmental organizations, and climate adaptation researchers from universities across Brazil. But the most meaningful recognition came from his fellow ranchers. The same people who had laughed at his stupid idea were now asking for detailed plans and construction guidance. Early outcomes are promising. Participating ranches have improved soil and water management, restored degraded pastures, and demonstrated that sustainable cattle ranching can be both profitable and climate smart. Regional ranching associations began organizing technical workshops where José would demonstrate his system and explain the construction process. The Pantanal Cattle Ranchers Federation officially invited him to present at their annual conference, a recognition that elevated him from regional curiosity to agricultural innovator. The economic analysis was compelling. José's underground system had cost approximately 180,000 reais to construct over 2 years, using mostly local materials and labor. Conventional cooling systems capable of protecting similar numbers of cattle would have cost over 400,000 reais and required ongoing electricity costs that made them prohibitively expensive for most ranchers. More importantly, the system required virtually no maintenance and could function indefinitely without mechanical components that might break down during critical periods. Such small reservoirs are used mostly for cattle breeding and irrigation of small areas for livelihood. José had created a small reservoir system that served multiple functions simultaneously. As the heat wave finally broke after 6 days with temperatures dropping back to the merely oppressive level of 95 centigrade, the transformation in José's reputation was complete. The man who had been mocked for his stupid underground pond was now being hailed as a visionary who had solved one of the most pressing challenges facing Brazilian cattle ranchers in an era of climate change. The innovation that had saved his cattle was about to transform an entire industry. 6 months after the devastating heat wave of March 2020, the landscape of cattle ranching in the Pantanal region had fundamentally changed. José da Silva Santos' stupid underground pond had sparked a revolution in climate adaptation that was spreading far beyond the borders of Mato Grosso. The success of José's system during the heat wave had captured the attention of government officials, agricultural researchers, and international climate adaptation experts. This public-private partnership, bringing together the government, Pontes Pantaneiras, non-governmental organizations, and private landowners, is now working to expand the FPS standard to cover 15%, 2 million hectares, or roughly 5 million acres, of the Pantanal's grasslands by 2030. Dr. Eduardo Rosa from MAP Biomas had completed his comprehensive study of José's innovation and was presenting the findings at agricultural conferences across Brazil. What Mr. Santos has demonstrated is that traditional ecological knowledge, when properly applied to modern challenges, can outperform expensive technological solutions, Dr. Rosa explained to audiences of ranchers, government officials, and environmental scientists. The state government of Mato Grosso had created a new climate adaptation grant program specifically designed to help ranchers implement underground cooling systems based on José's design. Governor Mauro Mendes announced 50 million reais in funding for what was being called the Underground Resilience Program, making José's innovation accessible to small and medium-sized ranchers throughout the region. José himself had become an unlikely celebrity in Brazil's agricultural community. His story appeared in national magazines, agricultural journals, and even international publications focusing on climate adaptation. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations invited him to present his innovation at a global conference on livestock climate resilience in Rome. But José remained focused on practical applications. Working with the State Agricultural Extension Service, he developed standardized plans and construction guides that could be adapted to different ranch sizes and local conditions. The most important thing is that people understand this isn't complicated, José emphasized. It's just old knowledge applied in a new way. The technical specifications had been refined through multiple implementations. The optimal depth for the chambers was determined to be 8 to 10 feet, providing consistent temperatures between 60–65 degrees Celsius, while remaining practical for construction with standard equipment. Water storage capacity was calculated at 15–20 liters per head of cattle per day, ensuring adequate supplies during extended drought periods. Miguel Santana had become the first neighboring rancher to complete his own underground system, finishing construction just before the 2021 dry season. José saved my business, Miguel admitted during an interview with TV Globo Rural. I would have gone bankrupt after the heatwave, but his innovation showed me there was a solution. The success stories were multiplying rapidly. Rancher Maria dos Santos in Corumbá completed a modified version of José's system that integrated solar-powered pumps for water circulation. The Silva family ranch near Cáceres created an underground network that protected 800 head of cattle and included integrated feed storage areas that remained cool during extreme heat. Universities across Brazil were studying the system and developing variations adapted to different climatic conditions. The Federal University of Mato Grosso do Sul established a research center dedicated to traditional ecological knowledge applications in modern agriculture, with José's system as the flagship example. Increases of 1.5 degrees Celsius and above may exceed limits for normal thermoregulation of poultry, broiler and layer chickens, pigs, and cattle, and could result in persistent heat stress for these animals in a range of different environments. With global temperatures continuing to rise, José's innovation was proving increasingly relevant beyond the Pantanal. International attention was growing as well. Agricultural delegations from Australia, Argentina, and parts of Africa visited José's ranch to study the system for potential application in their own hot climate regions. The Australian government funded a pilot project based on José's design for cattle stations in the Northern Territory. The environmental benefits were also becoming apparent. Unlike mechanical cooling systems that required significant energy consumption, José's underground approach actually helped with carbon sequestration and soil health improvement. Participating ranches have improved soil and water management, restored degraded pastures, and demonstrated that sustainable cattle ranching can be both profitable and climate smart. Most importantly, the system addressed the growing reality of climate change in agricultural regions. This year, southern and central Brazil are experiencing their worst drought in nearly a century. As extreme weather events became more frequent and severe, traditional adaptation methods were proving inadequate. As José stood in his pasture on a calm September morning, watching his cattle graze peacefully above the hidden chambers that had saved their lives, he reflected on the journey from mockery to recognition. My grandfather always said that the earth teaches us if we're willing to listen, he mused. People called it stupid because they forgot how to listen. Today, José da Silva Santos's underground cistern system protects over 5,000 head of cattle across dozens of ranches in Mato Grosso and Mato Grosso do Sul. What began as one man's stupid idea had become a cornerstone of climate adaptation strategy for Brazilian cattle ranching. The innovation that saved his cattle from 118 degree F heat had grown into a movement that was transforming how an entire industry prepared for an uncertain climate future. Sometimes, the most revolutionary ideas are those that remember the wisdom we thought we had left behind.